So bringing this message this morning, who are you trusting? A few weeks back, I brought a message entitled, When Trust is Challenged. And I made the point that trust is something that is always challenged. I brought that message on the back of the story of Moses. Not going to go into the details of that, but suffice to say that Moses, as a baby, had an inherent trust in his parents. Now, even though Moses lived some 3,500 years ago, and we're still talking about him today, even though Moses lived all those years ago, he was still like any other child, like the child that we're going to be dedicating today. He was just another child, but he was a child who depended on his parents. Depended on the mother that was carrying him to get him through the womb and to get him to the point of life. Trusting as a baby that his life would be protected by his parents and by those around him. He was just like any other child. But the situation he was born into, he was born into slavery. And at that particular time, Pharaoh had put out the word that every male child born to a Jewish woman was to be put to death. Nothing much has changed within 3,500 years. And our hearts bleed for the Palestinian children as much as for Israeli children. We don't take sides. We shouldn't take sides. But nothing much has changed in 3,500 years, and that's been the history of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even to this very day. But Moses, as he grew in life, he got to the point where he no longer needed to trust in his parents. He's trusting people around him. He's trusting friends. But he also put his trust in God. And he trusted God that in every situation, in every circumstance of life, that God would be with him. And even when God brought him back to Egypt to lead the people of Israel from slavery out of Egypt across the Red Sea and through the wilderness for those 40 years, that at that particular time, Moses knew what it was to trust God. And so the message then was when trust is challenged. And so often in his life and in our lives, even our trust in God is challenged. And our trust in each other is also challenged. I made the point that while our trust in each other faces issues, situations where we might want to question one another, we might want to question the trust that we place in one another, and people might want to question the trust that they place in us. The reality is that even as Christians, we have to admit that at times our trust in God faces similar challenges. And I want to be honest this morning, as we always are in this church. I have to say that I've lost trust in a lot of people over the years. A lot of people. But I also know that it works both ways. And I know that people have lost trust in me over the years. It works both ways. But I know that I can also say that I have never lost trust in God. There are times I've maybe questioned some of the stuff going on, but I've never lost trust in God. And so I want to say today that trusting God is not just something you do to become a Christian. We may well ask people, we do most weeks, and we may well ask people this morning, if you want to put your trust in Jesus, you want to follow him, then you pray this prayer, you raise your hand, you let us know you've done that. But trusting God is not just about becoming a Christian. Trusting God is something that you do as a Christian. It's something you do throughout your life as a Christian. And that's why I'm asking the question this morning, and I'm asking the question of all of us, of every single person in this room, whether you're a Christian or not, I'm asking you the question, who are you trusting? Who are you trusting? Who are you really trusting? The fact of the matter is that none of us can go through a single day without trusting someone. You cannot go through a single day in your life without trusting someone. That might be something as simple as getting into a car with someone. They're driving. You're trusting them. It's something you do naturally. You do You don't think too much about it unless you get into the car with Tommy Latimer. Then you got to think about it. You got to pray about it. Then you got to have a whole lot of trust. But there are things that we do. We trust people in the simple things of life. We trust those who are making our food. Kippers, you be careful what you eat the day after that one today. We trust those who are putting food down before us and so on. There are even some people still on this planet who have food tasters because they know there are so many people out to get them. But we trust. And then there are those times when it's not just as simple. There are those seasons in life that you are going through some very serious stuff. And it's then you need someone to trust. And I truly hope this morning that every one of us in this room have those in our lives that we can really, truly trust, especially in the seasons of life that are challenging and demanding. But where does God come in? See, we can look to people, we can say, well, we trust this person, that person. Where does God come in? Where and when does God come in to any one of our lives? How much do we trust God? How much do we trust God as Christians, not just to save us, but to keep us and to be with us in every twist and turn of life? John has been encouraging us in recent weeks to be seeking God. And how important that is to seek God. We truly need to seek God. My brother-in-law Robert keeps asking questions, and he asked the question after Jonathan brought that message a couple of weeks ago. And we meet on Wednesdays, and he usually has questions. And one of the questions was, how do we seek God? It's a fair enough question. How do we really seek God? My response is that there are many different ways to seek God, that you need to get your own time, your own place, and you seek God for yourself individually. But then there are times we come together like this as a church. We come together as the people of God. We're not just here to sing songs, to listen to a sermon. We're here to seek the face of God. And as we prayed for people this morning, we're praying that God will move in their lives and their circumstances, that God will bring healing, that God will open up doors for them. And we're seeking God on their behalf. We're not just saying prayers. Prayer meetings are not just about saying prayers. Worship is not just about singing a few songs. It's about seeking God. And there are many different ways that we seek God. But I want you to know today that the God that we encourage you to seek is the God you can trust. The God we encourage you to seek in this place is the God you can trust. I want to read a few verses from 2 Kings chapter 18. 2 Kings chapter 18, we're told that the king of Assyria, his name was Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, sent a large army to Jerusalem. In verse 18, they called for the king, and Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, the palace administrator, Shebna, the secretary, and Joah, son of Asaph, the recorder, they went out to them. Now, Sennacherib, his army, called for the king. They had surrounded Jerusalem. Over 200,000 troops. Assyrians completely surrounded the city of Jerusalem. And they called for the king, but the king sends these three out instead. And I'll explain why he did that. In verse 19, the commander said to them, tell Hezekiah, that's the king in Jerusalem, the king of the southern part of Israel, this is what the great king, the king of Assyria, says. On what are you basing this confidence of yours? You see, this army had invaded other cities and towns and villages on the way down to Jerusalem. They'd taken everything. They'd wiped everything out. They'd taken tens of thousands of Israelis at that time out of their homes, their towns, their villages, and they moved them up into the northern part of their kingdom. They displaced them. That's what happened then. But Jerusalem dug the heels in. And here they're saying to the king, what are you basing this confidence of yours? Do you not see what's happening out here? Verse 20, you say you have the counsel and the might for war, but you speak only empty words. On whom are you depending? Who are you trusting? That's what he's saying that you rebel against me? Who are you trusting? Who are you depending on? And that's the question I'm asking you this morning. We may not feel as if we've been surrounded by armies today, but we're surrounded by circumstances that challenge us. And so I'm asking you this morning, who are you depending on? Who are you trusting? When the stuff of life hits the fan, who are you trusting? When the enemy comes in like a flood and the circumstances begin to flood into your life, who are you trusting? When it comes to financial challenges that are so overwhelming and overpowering, who are you trusting? When it comes to sickness and disease, who are you trusting? When it comes to personal tragedy, who are you trusting? When it comes to walking through the valley of the shadow of death, not just for yourself, but holding the hand of a loved one, who are you trusting? People in this place, when we went through it last Sunday, we just felt moved by God just to call out people's names as to what they went through this particular year. And several other people, you know what it's been this year. I know what it's been to hold my younger brother by the hand as he was passing from this life into death through the valley of the shadow of death. We know what it's been like. Every one of us understand that. We all appreciate that. But in those moments, the question is, who are you trusting? David said in Psalm 20, verse 7, he said, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. David knew what it was then, that regardless of all the circumstances coming against them and coming against these people, he knew what it was not to trust in the arm of flesh, but to trust in the Lord his God. If David was writing in today's context, he'd be talking about tanks and planes, not about chariots and horses. He'd be talking about tanks and planes and drones and battleships and so on. But then David makes it absolutely clear that this is not what he's trusting in. He's trusting in the Lord his God. That was his trust. Even when he fought against invading armies, or even against a giant who was boasting against the nation of Israel, David's trust, whether it was an army or a giant, was in God. In fact, when he ran out onto the battlefield to face Goliath, he said to Goliath, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. And he took that giant out. Would to God that we still had that faith. You come against me with this and that and the other, but we're dependent on God today. That faith doesn't exist. I'm trying to get drawn into stuff and I won't. So I wonder, who or what are you trusting today? From you wake up in the morning until you lay your head to rest, who are you trusting in? You can't sleep. You can't stay awake. Who are you trusting in? You can't eat. You can't stop eating. Who are you trusting in? And while we thank God for those around us who can help us and who do help, our greatest help is God himself. What David said is a very present help in every time of trouble. It's like you can trust him in every time of trouble, David's saying. And when it comes to personal tragedy, when it comes to loss, and especially the loss of a loved one, when it comes to passing through that valley of the shadow of death, there's no one better to trust than God himself. Than God himself. But are you trusting him? As a Christian, are you trusting him? If you're not a Christian, then I don't need to ask you that question because you're not trusting him. That's the bottom line. That's the reason why you're not yet a Christian, because, and I say not yet, because our prayers for you is that you will become a Christian. And that's the prayers in this church and the prayers of family members. So we say those who are not yet Christians, it's because you're not yet trusting God. And we're encouraging you to do that in this place this morning. But this was asked of Hezekiah when Jerusalem was surrounded by invading armies. And there was no one to help. There was no one beyond the city of Jerusalem. There was no America. There was no Europe. There was nothing beyond the city of Jerusalem at that particular time. Other cities have been destroyed. There are people taken captive, as we said. So there was no one coming to the aid of Jerusalem. And yet Hezekiah refused to give in. Even though there was no help, no outside help, he refused to give in. He refused to give up. He refused to surrender. It gets me. It gets me whenever, as Christians, as believers, the simplest of thing calls it, we're going to quit. We're giving in. You know nothing about the challenges of life until you face something like this, when you know there's no one else. There's no one coming to your help. There's no one coming to rescue you. Hezekiah refused to quit because his trust was in God. Everything seemed against him, and it was, but yet he still trusted in God. That's why he sent those three out to the wall. He was seeking the face of God. This man was a man of prayer. His prophetic counsel, believe it or not, was Isaiah the prophet. He was the one that was speaking into his life. Oh, that an Isaiah would speak over Israel today. Speak over that nation, speak over even our nation and this world of ours. It seemed like there was no way out for this king and for his people, but yet he trusted God. In fact, the Bible tells us in the same chapter in verse 6 that Hezekiah departed not from following the Lord. He did not depart from following the Lord. When the king of Assyria realized that he was getting nowhere with Hezekiah, sometimes when the devil has a go at us and he knows that person, they're not letting up. And the devil gets to a point where he knows you're taking such a stand, he's got to find a different way. And so King Sennacherib tried a different way because Hezekiah was not coming out. He was not surrendering. He wasn't giving up. He wasn't quitting. So the king of Assyria tried a different tact. He tried to get at the king through the king's own soldiers. Think about that. I want to tell you, friends, if a devil can't get you directly, he will try through others. If the devil cannot get you directly, he will try through others. But Hezekiah wouldn't bend. And then he tried a different tact. The king of Assyria tried a different tact. He made false promises. Just come out, surrender to me, and we're going to do all this for you. Made so many promises. But Hezekiah could see through the falseness and the lies of this king. And friends, the Bible tells us exactly who the devil is. And the Bible tells us what the devil's tactics are and what the devil wants to achieve. Because the Bible tells us that he's the thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He's the thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And the Bible also tells us that the devil is the father of lies. People are listening to him. People think they've got a better life with the devil rather than God. You're listening to the lies of the devil. Just like the king of Assyria was out to destroy Hezekiah and Jerusalem, so the devil's intention is to destroy not just nations, but destroy every individual on the face of this earth. God has plans for the child that we will dedicate today, but so too has the devil. The Bible tells us that Jesus came that we might have life and have life in abundance. And that's the choice. So we either stand firm against the attacks, we stand firm against the enemy. We stand firm even when the devil changes tack and he tries to get at us by other means. We stand firm. The story ended whenever God sent an angel. See, Hezekiah was praying and God answered his prayers. And God answered his prayers by sending an angel, one angel, into the Assyrian camp. And that one angel destroyed. And again, I'm saying this carefully. He knew who this angel was targeting. But it destroyed 100 and 85,000 Assyrian soldiers. One angel. Man, with angel like that, I'm glad I'm on God's side. If that's the kind of angels that God has, I'm so glad I'm on God's side today. But every time that Hezekiah was facing major issues, I'm going to finish in a moment, but every time that Hezekiah was facing major issues, he prayed. He sought God. When the enemies were surrounding Jerusalem and coming against his city, he prayed. He sought God. When the king of Assyria threatened to destroy the city, Hezekiah sought God. And even when he himself became ill, as he did sometime after this, and was literally facing death, he prayed. He sought God. And God added 15 years to his life. Why? Because he trusted God. So as I'm finishing, who are you trusting? Who are you trusting? You might not be behind a walled city and overlooking some 200,000 troops, but who are you trusting in the midst of your circumstances? I'm not asking the question, what are you doing in church this morning? I'm asking who you're trusting. I'm not asking, what title do you have in this church or any other church? What ministry do you have? But who are you trusting? We can play guitars. We can sing. We can preach. But when the stuff hits the fan, who are you trusting? When you leave this church this morning, and you head off to do whatever you plan to do, who are you trusting? There's a lot of trust within communities. And sadly, people end up trusting the wrong people. And when trust breaks down, sometimes literally all hell could be let loose in those situations. I want to tell you, whatever happens in your life, if you trust God, you're going to find you turn right, He's there, you turn left. St. Patrick himself said it. He's in front of me, He's behind me, He's beside me. No matter where I go, He's everywhere. Even David said that in the Old Testament. Where can I go from your presence? Where can I flee from your spirit? We can't get away from you. And you need to know today that when you trust God, you're trusting someone who will walk with you through every situation, every circumstance of life, even though it's painful. Even though it's painful, He'll walk with you through those circumstances. And I invite you this morning to trust God. Christian, stop making excuses. Stop making excuses. Stop folding and bending every time the wind blows your way. Let's have a bit of backbone in us as believers. Trust God. Those who are not yet Christians, who are you trusting? God offers Himself today as someone you can absolutely, totally depend on in every situation of life, and to bring you into His presence for all eternity, which is something you never want to miss out on.